Important Cinema Club fans! As many of you may know, this hello at the beginning of every episode is my homage to Robin Williams and Good Morning Vietnam. And I'm here today with...
It's Will Sloan. He's kind of like Richard Nixon. I am not a crook. He's kind of like Queen Elizabeth. We are not amused. He's kind of like, I don't know, give me some other kind of outdated cultural icons.
I don't know.
He's like John Wayne. Well, see here, partner.
Oh yeah, wait, you can't go there anymore, Will. You can't go into the Robin Williams parody territory that was his bread and butter in the 80s. Because this is going to be, I think, a controversial episode to a lot of people who click on this excited for us to talk about Robin Williams.
Are we going to speak ill of the dead?
I don't want to speak ill of Robin Williams because we're going to say this a lot this episode. He was a big part of each of our childhoods.
Yeah, I'd like to start just by saying that I actually do think Robin Williams was a great actor. And I would even go so far as to say that I like him. Like, when he's on screen, I feel affection for him. When I see that face, he's a very friendly guy to see in a movie. I perk up. I no longer find him funny. And that feels weirdly amazing to say because when I was a small child, like, if there's one thing everybody could agree on, of all ages, all races, all classes, it's that Robin Williams was funny.
I spent at least a day a week as a child watching Mrs. Doubtfire. It was one of the 3 videotapes my dad owned, so when I visited him, me and my brother would usually sit down, pop it in, and just smiles would come to our faces. And revisiting it this week, I remembered the broad strokes of it, but I did not remember one thing that I laughed at as a child. And as an adult revisiting it, definitely, I could not figure out what was the funny stuff.
Yeah, it was a baffling experience for me too, because I remember as a kid having favorite scenes from Mrs. Doubtfire. I remember having things that I thought were funny, like all that shenanigans of him at the restaurant at the end, changing between Mrs. Doubtfire and his own guys, going from table to table, or, some of those other kind of farcical scenes, like him burning himself when he's cooking. I remember as a kid thinking that stuff's funny. And I'm watching it now, and it just feels so lax. It feels so badly paced. And that's just putting aside everything else wrong with the movie, which is everything. I mean, if Mrs. Doubtfire came out today, it would be a Cats level disaster.
I don't want to get too much into why it's as terrible as it is. I mean, it's right there on the surface, right? Like, you see the premise, looks like a parody trailer, but it's not. It was one of the biggest hits of its time, and I did not know another child who didn't love Mrs. Doubtfire, which is crazy to me, and shame on the adults that foisted this upon young, innocent children who did not know any better.
Wow, foisted it? I mean, as a kid, I loved this movie. You didn't need to foist this on me. I was watching it every week, too. I mean...
But why? What is, that magic sauce that made us all fall in love with Robin Williams? Who, as a person, is this thing that popped for the entire world, at his most dominant period?
I had a lot of opportunity to think about that this week. While I was watching these movies, just utterly stone-faced. I'll try to answer as both an adult and a kid, because, as I said, he had incredible across-the-board appeal. As an adult, I think people who liked him maybe had just never seen anything like him. There was Jerry Lewis, there were manic comedians before him, but I don't think there had ever been a stand-up who was quite as busy as him, who was going, who was talking that fast, talking about that many things. His routines were so dense. He was making so many different cultural references. It was exhausting to try to keep up with him. And, that on top of the fact that he is a genuinely talented performer. He can do those voices. He can hold an audience.
And as a kid, you didn't know any of the references that he was making. So what was magical about him were the switches from the extreme highs to the extreme lows, and it was an adult breaking the contract that other adults take. The idea of you have to be somber, you have to deliver these straight. This was an adult doing what the most excited kid high on sugar would do. And there was something magical about that when you yourself are a child watching it. Now, for the adults, shame on them.
Hang on. In fairness to Robin Williams, we both watched a documentary about him this week, which was an HBO doc from a year or two ago. I forget what it's called. Come Inside My Mind, I think it's called. And there are some clips of his early stand-up. I think he actually did have some very funny moments, like in his Night at the Met special, which I think is his definitive, it's his Carlin at Carnegie. It's his most famous set. There's a bit in there that he does where he's like acting as his own penis and he's talking to his penis and he's like having a back and forth dialogue. And I laughed watching that. I think as a stand-up, he was at his best when he was talking about his own demons.
And that he wasn't making pop culture references and that the joke was him switching between all of these things. Because when he's talking to his own penis, he's not imitating anyone but his penis.
Yeah, and he's talking about something that's real and raw. He's talking about his vulnerabilities. He's talking about his addictions, his alcoholism, his lusts, his insecurities. When he's talking about politics, I think he's like less than useless. But when he's talking about the demons that drove him, I think he could be very funny.
Like, me and my family would watch Robin Williams on Broadway all the time on DVD. We love that DVD. And I didn't rewatch it again this week, but I didn't get anything about it. No references that he was making culturally, politically, or otherwise. It was just him on stage, waving his arms around, saying words I kind of recognized, and sweating up a storm. And that's what I loved about him.
Yeah, there are a few bits from Live on Broadway, which of course I also saw. Everybody saw it in the early 2000s. There are a few bits in it that I remember fondly. But again, it's stuff like what I talked about. I remember there was a bit in it where he's like talking about, he's like struggling to open a condom.
Oh, I remember that. And then he puts it like, he's like, ugh!
And then he's like trying to maintain his erection while he's doing it. Like,
I should not have been watching that as a child, but I did. I probably had no idea what they were talking about.
I remember that special ends with him like doing like pretending to do cunnilingus, and he's like doing it on his own arm, and like that yes. that was really funny. Like when he's, I don't know, like there are certain subjects, most of them like penis or sex related, that I think he was very funny on. But yeah, when he's talking about like Michael Jackson or George W. Bush, and he's just doing voices of like dead pop culture figures, oh my god.
I mean, watching Mrs. Doubtfire again, there's a scene where it's just him riffing, and like there's jump cuts to go from character to character, as if like during the day he's like, I'll give you a bunch of options, and the producers went, this is too good, we need to keep every one of them. And as a kid, I had no idea who these people are, but he was doing funny voices. It was great. As an adult, I know who most of these people are, and I'm like, this is so lame.
Okay, listen, let's talk about Mrs. Doubtfire, because we don't need to go through his life history. We don't need to say that he started on Mork and Mindy and that he did this and he did that. Everybody knows.
Did you ever watch Mork and Mindy? I never watched it once. It wasn't something that was in syndication.
I rented a VHS of it once. That was at my local Blockbuster as a kid, so I think I've seen like 2 episodes of it. But yeah, it was never on syndication when I was a kid either.
But what was the movie that made him pop?
I think it was Good Morning Vietnam, because he did Popeye, which made a certain amount of money but was not particularly loved. And then he did a couple of movies after that that didn't quite click. But Good Morning Vietnam came out in 1987, and that was a movie where they, I guess, figured out how to harness his particular talent within the context of a movie. And I'm playing devil's advocate here, because I watched Good Morning Vietnam this week for the first time ever, and I fucking hated it. I hated almost every...
I mean, I saw it when I was a kid. I think it was one of the ones that were available, because he was nominated for an Oscar for it. So I was like, okay, I'll check this out. I remember as a kid not liking it as well. And rewatching it again, it's like, oh God, it's everything that plays to like Robin Williams' strengths in the easiest way possible, in like a product that is so shameless in the way that it tackles like its subject matter. Like it's racist, it's xenophobic, it's transphobic, it's
don't forget sexist. It's sexist.
Very sexist. I mean, there's literally a scene where Robin Williams is like, ugh, you eat this? And the guy's like, it's fish balls. And he's like, I don't know, fish had balls. And you can just imagine the audience would be like, ha ha ha, Vietnam is weird and not like North America, which is normal.
Oh my, there's a whole subplot in the movie where he wanders into this English class for Vietnamese people, and he wanders in because he's basically stalking this young Vietnamese girl that he wants to bang, and he basically just takes over the class. He like goes up to the teacher and says, "Oh, hey, how about I teach them American slang?" And then like he just takes over the class for weeks.
Yeah, doing shtick in front of them, and like they're smiling and laughing, but it's like, they wouldn't know what he's saying, but maybe they were reacting like we did as children. This man is making funny faces and changing voices. It's fun, but in the context of the movie, it's like, no, this is weird.
Yeah, and I guess he had to be there in 1987. Those radio routines that he does, where he's just riffing, all of which were improvised, by the way. I don't know. Not only do I not find it funny right now, but it's actually very hard for me to imagine a world where anybody did. But they did. They did. And many people probably still do. And
would you find it funny if you were seeing it like in the same room? Because I bet you would. Yeah,
probably. In the documentary, they show some bloopers from the sets of his movies. And I could imagine.
Good.
Yeah, they are good. And like I could imagine being on the set with Robin Williams while he's like riffing, because a lot of it depends on like he's puncturing the solemnity of the atmosphere that you're in. He's a big kid, like trying to make you laugh when you're there. And I bet he was even probably pretty funny when you saw him live. Like, I think it made a big difference when you were sitting in an audience and there he was on stage, flesh and blood. And there was that sense of unpredictability in the air.
That raw energy as well, where it's like, what is he going to do next? Where is he going to switch to? Something like Good Morning Vietnam, though, sets a really bad template for the rest of his career, which is the funny man comes into a dangerous or, stifling environment, and through the magic of laughter, he teaches everyone a lesson.
That's right. For Robin Williams, it was never enough to just be funny. He was also he was constantly playing this, like, ambassador for comedy. He was playing this good spirit who used comedy to heal people, but was constantly being challenged by petty, closed-minded bureaucrats, whether it's like Dead Poets Society, whether it's Patch Adams, the ultimate example.
At one point in Good Morning Vietnam, a guy runs in and he's like, "You're not doing comedy. Comedy is like slapstick and people that confuse their identities." And I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds good. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, he's constantly running up against this authority figure played by Bruno Kirby, who's coming in and being like, "Listen, we don't take too kindly to jokes in Vietnam. Humor is an agent of chaos." And it's like, the deck is stacked. It's not a fair fight. Nobody would actually be like this.
But, Robin Williams is there and he brings a smile to everyone's face. And at the end, he leaves Vietnam. I assume they won the war thanks to his laughter. I don't know. I was kind of tuned out by the end.
So it was never enough for Robin Williams to just be funny. But he was particularly, I guess, vulnerable to having that like Chaplin disease of always wanting to be sentimental, because there's something about him. Like, he's obviously a very needy presence. You can't be that energetic and that over the top without like desperately craving audience validation. And there's something about his face. He doesn't have the kind of face that was slick like Jim Carrey. He had a wide open face with a big mouth, and he wasn't, particularly handsome. He looked vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, that's why his dramatic performances are so strong, where he gets a chance often to be funny, but it's not central to his character or the plot, where in stuff like Patch Adams, it's like, we want to let Robin go unleashed. And it's like, oh God, no. Even though as a kid, I loved Patch Adams, could not get enough of it.
People forget that Patch Adams was a massive hit. And I think it was probably the beginning of the end for him too, because after that, his career started to take a slide. I think Patch Adams was like a big hit, but it also, maybe America was not ready for that much Williams, because I think I might have like turned them off him forever. It was just so pure.
Well, after Good Morning Vietnam, he moved right into Dead Poets Society. That was his next starring role pretty much. And it seems like he was on that upward trajectory of being like a dramatic actor who can also do comedy. But you get a sense that like Williams, the reason he's so energetic and all over the place is that he needs that laughter, and he needs it, like you said, so badly that it has to be immediate, which is why his comedy, like looking at it now, we're not in that moment, it doesn't have the same impact because there is that immediacy. It relies on so many pop culture things. And also, the old standby. It was a different time where, gay panic jokes were the go-to thing. Or, doing a voice of, for example, an African-American man.
Oh, he did that a lot.
Yep. Because it would give him an opportunity to switch between registers, and that's what would trigger the comedy. I mean, as a kid, the thing that made me fall in love with Robin Williams was probably Aladdin. I played that VHS endlessly as a kid. And in that character, you have a great joke delivery system. And one, again, like, I didn't know he was doing Rodney Dangerfield. Didn't matter. It was still funny.
When you're a kid, like, most things you don't know, so you kind of take it on face value. And since you know so few things, the things that make you laugh are funny voices, because you can understand that, a man in a dress, you can understand that. Yeah, and that's basically all the comedy that you have available to you.
Because let's move on to Mrs. Doubtfire. I thought we left, but we're right back here again. I mean, I don't know what to say about it. I just watched this in horror, like a train wreck happening in front of me.
I almost want to go through it beat by beat, because this movie was, and perhaps even still is, so popular. And I still think people don't have it in their heads just how incredible, how wrong-headed almost every frame of this movie is.
Do you think that the people who are like, I love Mrs. Doubtfire, have watched it in the last 10 years?
No. Or, well, okay, they may have watched it in the last 10 years, but they certainly haven't watched it in the last 2.
I mean, the whole film is a bad dad who doesn't take any responsibility, decides to gaslight his family to be closer to them.
Yeah, and okay, listen, we all know what Mrs. Doubtfire is about. The divorced dad poses as the nanny, which, I mean, right there on the surface... And okay, you can say it was a different time. Obviously, comedy depends on context, but I don't know. I genuinely don't know. It's true there was a time when this premise seemed totally okay by me, but
now it's just shocking. Now I'm thinking about, like, why did everybody watch it? Didn't McDonald's give Mrs. Doubtfire out with the Happy Meals? Did they have a deal like they did with Back to the Future? Because that's why I own Back to the Future.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. It made over $200 million. It was the second biggest movie of the year. That's like over $400 million adjusted for inflation. And it's strange to watch, too, because this absurd premise, like, you can imagine somebody like Robin Williams' friend Bobcat Goldthwait making a really funny, dark comedy out of this premise. But it's filmed like a John Hughes movie, just very kind of languidly paced.
Well, there's no judgment. It's just like something that happened. The movie is 2 hours and 5 minutes.
Oh my God, it moves like molasses, and it treats it totally seriously, totally... you're totally sympathetic to Daniel Hillard, played by Robin Williams.
Yeah, Sally Fields is a monster for wanting a divorce with a man that destroyed the entire house with a petting zoo that he wasn't paying attention to.
Yeah, the deck is definitely stacked. I mean, I'm sure that director Chris Columbus would tell you that he's taking no sides, that it's a difficult situation. But come on, who is the average person in the audience going to like more? This shrewish woman who is so focused on career and work, or this funny dad who's, maybe a little lax on certain responsibilities, but he loves his kids. He loves his kids so much that he just can't be away from them, and his wife won't let him see them.
He has one job, and that's to prove to the judge that his life is in order, and instead of doing that, he decides to go undercover as an old maid to just keep an eye on his family, and also sabotage any new relationships his wife is trying to have with hunk Pierce Brosnan.
Okay, and you can say that this movie is of its time, but I'll tell you why I know it was bad and insidious even in its time. Because they cast Harvey Fierstein as his brother, which Harvey Fierstein is there only to say, don't worry, he's in a dress, but he's not gay. This is a gay guy.
This guy is gay, yeah, but he's not gay. He's like your teacher dressing up during Halloween. hilarious.
Right. That means the filmmakers are thinking about these issues. That means they've thought it all the way through, and they've still come down on the side of evil.
Yep, dude, looks like a lady. Could not wait for that montage when I'm watching it as a kid. So excited. Him with the vacuum cleaner. Oh, that's gold.
There is a reason, though, that a generation of kids fell in love with Robin Williams in this movie. It's because he feels like just the ultimate perfect adult, because he's very kid-like. He tells a lot of jokes. He's very manic. He's not perfect. He's not a real adult like Sally Fields. You know, Sally Fields shoulders all the burdens of being a responsible adult, and that's not fun, and that's not cool. She's not letting you eat cake.
Yeah, it's like, you know why Sally Field can't read Charlotte's Web to you, kid? It's because she's working until 10 o'clock at night while your deadbeat dad just hangs around the house.
Yeah, but also he's like, he seems like a very gentle presence. He's very loving. He's got that wide open face. He's both like a kid, but he's also this endlessly supportive, tending father figure who will always protect you, right? Like he's the best of all possible worlds, except like being a responsible adult.
Yeah, or being someone sane. At the end of the movie, a judge is like, this is not good. You are not allowed to see your family anymore because you gaslit them all and dressed up as an old woman just to get close to them. And it's played like, how could the judge do this? And the movie ends with Sally Fields going, if you cared that much, that means I'll let you back into my life, instead of being like, we need a restraining order against this man because he's going to murder us.
Yeah, that's called Stockholm Syndrome.
I mean, speaking of that, like, childlike presence, I think that's why he works very well in something like Jumanji, where you have another movie around him, and he can't, like, do a bunch of pop culture references or silly voices to make an impact. And I think he works in Jumanji. Jumanji was another one that I watched a lot as a kid, and I feel like if I watch it again, it would still hold up as that adventure movie with a comedic presence portrayed by Robin Williams.
There are a lot of movies I think he's really good in. I'm not the biggest fan of The Fisher King, but I think it harnesses his talent very well.
I agree, where it's that kind of manicness, but also overlaid with sadness, which the manicness works in conjunction with. I mean, he's great in Jack. No, he's not great at Jack. That was a movie I was so excited for. I think I saw it in theaters. Like, I have a vivid memory of seeing it.
I saw it in theaters, too. My first Francis Ford Coppola film.
Even as a kid, I was like, what is this? At the end where he's giving, like, the graduation speech as an old man. Yeah. I'm like, oh, my God.
And then doesn't he show his ass? No, that's Patch Adams.
Yeah, that's Patch Adams. I mean, speaking of films that he's good in, like, he's really good in Good Will Hunting.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I think he won an Academy Award for that movie. But then you have stuff like Bicentennial Man, which, oh boy, that I think that was like one of those breaking point films where even as a child I was like, what is this?
There definitely came a point when the audience turned on Robin Williams, or, you know, didn't even necessarily turn on him, because when he died, there was an outpouring of grief for him, probably like no other celebrity death I've ever seen. Not even Michael Jackson, I think, was quite at that level. Like, he burrowed his way into people's brains as kids, you know, at such a formative age, and he was such a beloved presence. Even I enjoy seeing him in movies, you know? There's something about him that's just so innately likable. And yet, there came a point when audiences didn't want to see him anymore. And the lifespan of movie comedians isn't generally all that long. Most of them get like 10 years. And, you know, he probably got 15.
I mean, you say it like he was delivering great work, and the audiences were like, no, thank you. Because, I mean, if you want that breaking point, it's called Jacob the Liar. Like, once that movie came out, he actually, if you look at his filmography chronologically, he did switch to doing dramatic stuff, or stuff that's more challenging, because you then have 1 Hour Photo, Death to Smoochie, Insomnia.
So when Insomnia and Death to Smoochie and 1 Hour Photo came out, they were being hyped as he's taking his career in a different direction. He's doing darker stuff. He's doing weirder stuff. And Insomnia and 1 Hour Photo did pretty well for him. But then, you know, in a couple of years, he was back with RV.
I was going to say that the end of his dramatic quadrilogy was House of D.
Oh, yeah, when he went full Simple Jack.
Yes, that's right. But yeah, RV was his return to comedy. And you have never seen more of a man like having a gun held to him off screen than Robin Williams' performance in RV, which me and Will watch for this podcast.
Why did I watch it? What a waste of time.
Because I had read Barry Sonnenfeld's biography that he recently released, and I was like, oh, he mentions that he didn't work well with Robin Williams. And it's like, well, because the movie's terrible. It's a perfect example of like rich white suburban family problem movie. So it's like, it's the dad and he works too much.
Yeah, it's a movie that just never comes to life. It's never funny. It's like, if people don't know what RV is, and I'm sure you all know what it is, I'm sure you were all there when it came out and you didn't go see it. But yeah, it's like National Lampoon's Vacation, but not as funny, very low key. The gags aren't very good and nobody's likable and it just never catches fire and nobody looks like they're having a good time except for Jeff Daniels as the kooky Southern guy. He's funny.
Jeff Daniels is having a ball in this movie. And it's another example of like, what were the filmmakers thinking that they try to present Jeff Daniels as like this dumb hick who doesn't know what he's talking about in his first appearance, saying that Ernest Goes to Jail is a good movie, and we're supposed to be like, ah, look at this dumb guy. How dare you, RV? How dare you?
Basically, after 1 hour photo, Robin Williams' career gets pretty sad. There are a lot of comedies Man of the Year, or which actually isn't even really a comedy now that I think of it. It's a bizarre, I don't know what the hell Man of the Year is.
Wasn't Old Dogs, the movie he made with John Travolta, a pretty big hit as well, though?
I don't think it was. I don't think he really did a studio comedy after Old Dogs. I mean, he was in the Night at the Museum movies, but Old Dogs, I think, was pretty instantly greeted as just an embarrassment.
I thought it was so popular, it led to Wild Hogs.
No, it was the other way around. It was... Old Dogs was by the director of Wild Hogs, and you remember that Old Dogs was originally an R-rated comedy that they had
was it? I don't remember that. I'm sorry. I didn't go through I didn't follow the production of Old Dogs in Variety.
This is just one of those facts that when I hear it, I'll never forget it. It started as an R-rated comedy, and then it was changed in post-production to be a PG-rated family comedy, and you can imagine how coherently it hangs together after that.
I mean, right before Old Dogs, though, he made World's Greatest Dad.
Yeah, and I think that's the one bright spot of his late career, and it is really good, and I think it has maybe Robin Williams' best performance in it.
I agree, because he gets to play a human being who is reacting to the situation around him, but he still gets to be funny and have like quips here or there, but it's an awkwardness that you feel was closer to his real personality when he couldn't be really big, and when you can't be really big, there's like a balance you have to hit, and you see that in the movie. For people that don't know, it's a film directed by Robin Williams' good pal, Bobcat Goldthwait, and that's not a joke, they were good pals. And it's about a teacher played by Robin Williams who's a failed writer who's never gotten a book published, and his kid is a little shit. For people who haven't seen the movie, I don't really want to spoil it for anyone because the film takes a big turn an hour in. If you read about it, you'll find it. And I actually watched the trailer to see, like, how did they sell it? And the trailer is like, this dad has a terrible kid. And it's like, man, people were probably very surprised when they saw how the film plays out.
Yeah, but it's a very clever satire, and it leans heavily into the sad side of Robin Williams, but it also gives him, you know, he gives him a certain dignity, too. It allows him to hit melancholy note. It also allows him to play his age. In a lot of the other movies, you know, he's still this manic sprite, or even Patch Adams, I think he's basically playing younger than he is. But in this one, he gets to fully wear the weatheredness of his face and body.
And watching this movie and knowing that he was really good friends with Bobcat, and he had appeared briefly as a mime teacher in Shakes the Clown, Bobcat's directorial debut, you get the sense that, like, Robin was a very loyal guy because he worked with Chris Columbus multiple times on Mrs. Doubtfire and Bicentennial Man. He worked with Barry Levinson multiple times on Good Morning Vietnam and Toys. It makes you just wish that, like, man, hang out with Bobcat more. Like, he knows how to utilize you in the right way.
Yeah, maybe if he'd spent more time with Bobcat and less time with Billy Crystal, we would have less complaints about him.
Because we did watch that documentary that we mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, and like Billy Crystal is featured so much in it.
Oh God, I just cannot abide Billy Crystal.
At one point, Billy Crystal is like, after Robin got his heart surgery, I left 15 voicemails about pretending to be someone who had to fix the valve on his car. I just couldn't wait for him to wake up and just have a bunch of laughs he could enjoy.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, Billy, I think you're projecting in this case. But I hope what people come away from this conversation isn't that, like, we don't like Robin Williams, because we do. Love him in World's Greatest Dad. I mean, he's good in Good Will Hunting and Dead Poets Society.
I could rattle off probably 10 movies I think that he's really good in. Popeye, he's really good in.
But, like, the classic image of Robin Williams in his prime 90s comedy phase is something that does nothing for me. If it does something for the listeners, you know what? I'm glad. Because, more laughter in the world, it's great.
Here's what I'll say about Robin Williams in his prime comedy phase. There's that old cliche that, I'm going to talk in a Borscht Belt comedian voice right now. I'm going to say, there are some comics who say funny things, and there are some comics who say things funny. Well, I would say that Robin Williams was definitely firmly in the latter. I don't think in his stand-up he said many funny things, but I do think even in the stand-up that I don't like, there's still talent there. There's still a whirling ball of energy, and there's still an innate likability. An innate lovability that carried him along.
I wonder why I have the nostalgia I do for Jim Carrey, but I don't for Robin Williams.
It's funny because there are a lot of people who do feel very nostalgic for Robin Williams, and I think even I'm perhaps one of them, because Mrs. Doubtfire, I mean, it's catastrophic, it's awful, and it deserves to be remembered as like one of the worst comedies ever made, and yet people don't think of it that way. They don't think about it in the same breath as like Master of Disguise, which is a better movie than Mrs. Doubtfire is.
I gotta admit, I probably laughed more as an adult watching Master of Disguise than I did watching Mrs. Doubtfire.
And, the explanation for that comes down to the fact that Robin Williams is a more pleasant guy to be around than Dana Carvey. He's a more lovable guy. And that's got to count for something. So that's Robin Williams. Justin, do we have any letters this week?
We do have letters, and our first one is from Marcus Scott, and it goes, "Hello, Justin and Will. Just wondered if you'd ever thought of doing an episode on play-to-movie adaptations. Did you have any general thoughts about what separates a great one as Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf from a forgotten Oscar bait film such as Fences? Love the show, Marcus." That's actually a topic that I don't think we've ever discussed because it's so broad.
That's an interesting question. I mean, I have opinions, but I think they're kind of like the same opinions that any cinephile has, which are, I like it when they open it up and they reimagine it for the screen instead of just kind of like slavishly restaging it. I mean, the Laurence Olivier Shakespeare movies kind of get a bad rap these days because they're so stage bound. They're kind of static, and they're very much records of the performances. But I mean, something like Olivier's Hamlet is good just for capturing Olivier's performance. But I definitely much prefer the Orson Welles Shakespeare movies.
But then if you look at Kenneth Branagh's Shakespeare films, they're so lavish and like giant that they kind of crush the words that are being spoken by the actors.
Yeah, that's interesting too. I mean, Glengarry Glen Ross is a good adaptation. I think it opens up the play just enough. It adds some stuff. The Alec Baldwin character, for example, wasn't in the play of that. But when I watch Glengarry Glen Ross, I'm not constantly thinking, oh, this is a filmed stage play.
I mean, David Mamet is a great example in that, like, a lot of his plays have been adapted to movies. And what's interesting is that because his dialogue is so specific in its unreality, that it's kind of great to watch it in movie form. I mean, Stuart Gordon did Edmund, which is a David Mamet adaptation. And that one's really weird because watching it on the screen, it feels even more disconnected. And I think it works to its advantage because it's so unpleasant.
I don't think Carnage is one of Roman Polanski's best movies, but Polanski as a filmmaker knows how the camera works and he knows how to build tension in a scene. So I know people complained that particular movie felt too stage bound, but I don't know. I think when you give it a close reading, I think he's doing good, interesting things with editing and with cinematography to make it feel more cinematic than it might have been.
Do you know much about like theater and playwrights beyond the expected cultural stuff for someone of your standing?
Not really. I mean, I took English as a minor in undergrad, and I'm like a casual theater goer, you know. I like Beckett, I like Pinter, and I like I like some Oscar Wilde. I like all the famous names, you know.
Man, in that Robin Williams documentary, they show the Steve Martin Robin Williams Waiting for Godot. Would have loved to have been in that audience, but I wouldn't have been because I see no theatrical productions because it's way too expensive and I can't afford it.
It would have been interesting to see because it looks like Robin Williams was riffing through it. Like in that clip, we heard him do the Twilight Zone theme, and it's like, gotta hand it to a guy who will just riff through a Samuel Beckett play.
You know, I think it would be interesting. I think maybe we need to focus in. We would do like a Shakespeare episode before we would do just like plays to films, I would say.
We should do a Shakespeare episode.
Or even David Mamet. Now that's a filmmaker you can dig into.
I have some very mixed feelings about him.
It's a shame he died before 9/11 happened.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much for this letter. And as per usual, you can send us your questions at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. This week on our Patreon, we're going back to old territory. What are we talking about, Will?
We are following up on our classic episode about Godfrey Ho, the famous cut-and-paste filmmaker who made over 40 movies with the word ninja in the title. And we're going back to him because we've made many discoveries since then. We've seen many different films that he's made and that people around him have made, but also because pretty much every fact that we said on that episode was wrong.
Oh, yeah. Almost 100% wrong. So.
And this, of course, ties into the new Gold Ninja video DVD release, Ninja Vortex, where you collected...
Blu-ray release.
Blu-ray release, pardon me. Where you collected a bunch of his films and the films of his colleagues.
So you can listen to that conversation at patreon.com/theimportantcinemaclub by becoming a $5 member. And you can also buy the Ninja Vortex release, which has endless talk about Godfrey Ho and friends, and somehow we talked about stuff that doesn't get mentioned on the disc, so you want to get both of them, and you can get that disc set at goldninjavideo.com. It's only $20 for 3 discs of Godfrey Ho and friends goodness, 9 movies, 4 commentary track, 7 featurettes, and a trailer reel where every trailer has ninja in the title, and they're all movies that were released by IFD and Filmark. So, which is crazy. Will you go insane if you watch it all in one sitting? I don't know. You'll have to watch it to find out. So what are we doing next week, Will?
Next week, we are going to travel to New York in the early 1980s. We are looking at the films of the no-wave scene. That is the filmmakers, the artists, people who are living in the Lower East Side, creating strange, transgressive, very low-budget cinema. There's a huge canon of these movies. Filmmakers like Nick Zedd, Richard Kern, Beth B., Amos Poe, even a young Jim Jarmusch began in this scene.
We're not touching Jim Jarmusch, though.
Yeah, he'll be his own episode at some point. It's crazy we haven't got to him yet.
I don't think his name has ever come up once doing the show. That is crazy.
Yeah, I like him. I'm a fan. I don't think we've entirely finalized what we're going to be doing, but I'm pretty sure we're going to be talking about Nick Zedd's They Eat Scum. Probably something by Beth B. Probably something by Amos Poe. Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
I wonder, do people actually watch any of the movies we say that we're going to talk about next week? Let us know on the Discord, or just tweet at us. I'm curious. I don't think anybody does, but, you know, if you do.
And probably fewer than ever this week.
Hey, everybody wants to know about the no-wave movement. It's what's on the tip of everybody's tongue.
Okay, hey, I got a recommendation. Everybody listening to this podcast, watch Fingered by Richard Kern, starring Lydia Lunch.
Don't listen to Will.
Watch it and get the whole family in and
Nope, don't do that.
Have a great time.
All right, so that's what we'll be talking about next week. So until then, my name's Justin DeGroot.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening. Hi, this is Justin interrupting briefly to thank some new Patreon subscribers, who include Randy Rivet, Robert Krantz, Jordan Friedland, Matthew Blencarn, and William Cumby. Thank you very much for your support. We couldn't do it without you. And now, we return you to your regular scheduled programming.
Well, Justin, I did something that I almost never do these days, which is I saw a movie in public this week.
And by public, you meant in the comfort of your own car, surrounded by strangers.
That's right. I literally rented a car and went to the Docks Drive-In in Toronto to see a screening of the glorious new 4K restoration of David Cronenberg's Crash. And the idea of seeing Crash at a drive-in sounds great on paper. I gotta say, it was not that I mean, look, I'm happy to get out of the house and do anything these days. I'm happy to have an activity. It was fun to drive. I don't drive much anymore either.
Wait, did you drive?
I did drive, yes.
Were you by yourself?
Yes, I was, which is incredible. It's like that archetype of the lonely guy that drives. It's because my girlfriend was caring for our sick dog, so she wasn't able to come. And it's not like I can invite anyone else. It's like I can't.
No, you can't.
I can't be in a car with anyone.
But, like, it was a sold-out screening, wasn't it?
Yeah, there were a lot of people there, and the movie looked like it was being projected from a laptop, which is not great when the like 3/4 of the movie take place at night.
I can guarantee you it was projected from a laptop, an HDMI plugged into it, which is fine. But why? Like, the dog's drive-in is they're there permanently. Why don't they have a bright projector? They're in the city. What is going on?
Oh my god, it looked so awful. I mean, I could barely follow the second half of the movie. So much of it was just so dark. And also, for the first half of the movie, there was R&B music coming from a nearby event, which just about drowned out everything.
Why is there an event going on during this pandemic?
I don't know, but you've never seen Crash until you've seen it with an R&B soundtrack.
So it was like going to the 42nd Street Drive-In, right, Will? Actually, that's a lie. The screen would have been bright and you could have probably heard the muffled sound.
Right, but I guess I could theoretically have masturbated in my car to this movie, so that's why it's like the 42nd Street Drive-In. Or 42nd Street Grindhouse.
Yeah, well, I hope all these drive-ins that are popping up will actually try to improve this stuff, or they don't, because they go, you don't got any better, you suckers. We can give you even darker projection, and you would still come. Speaking of quality of movie theaters, haven't been good for that long. Haven't been very good for the last, 15 years, I would say, since 35mm went away when certain norms, it kind of disappeared.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I always feel like I'm a Luddite when I talk about this, when I talk about how much better film was. But, I mean, look, ever since film was taken away, do movie theaters, do the proper masking?
No.
No, they never do. Does the image look brighter than it used to? No, it looks a lot darker.
It looks way darker.
And I mean, I just saw Crash at a drive-in seemingly from a laptop, and it looked awful.
I bet that if it had been on 35mm, it would have been nice and bright. The bulb would have probably been, a standard that it has to hit, as opposed to, I think that in the theaters, what really gave them the gall to turn the darkness really low is because it makes the bulbs last longer, and it's because 3D was projected really low, was dark, so they're like, if people are watching it 3D and they're paying more for it, we'll just leave it like that, we won't touch it.
Yeah.
And that just became the norm. And, it'll probably stay like that, considering that the Paramount decree was finally struck down. What is that, Will?
Oh my goodness. Well, the Paramount decree was the thing that I guess helped lead to the end of the studio era, because it was a famous Supreme Court decision that ruled movie studios could not own theaters.
Do you know what prompted it? Like, why would they have made that? Like, it makes sense on paper of antitrust lawsuits, but everyone in politics are corrupt, so why would they force that through? Who were they trying to destroy?
God, I don't know. It's been forever since, Film 101. But basically, studios could get guaranteed block booking for all of their product to every theater, basically. And then this decree ended that, and it opened up for more independent theaters and exhibitors.
And it also changed the way they had to sell movies, because now it was based even more on what would be a success, what won't. I mean, that's what caused Poverty Row films to disappear, because they were just a product to fill a gap. And now they didn't need that anymore, because it was based on how much someone would enjoy the individual piece played at a movie theater. But now that's gone. And so companies like Netflix are going to buy so many friggin' theaters and just play their Netflix movies. Amazon's going to do the same thing. Welcome to Disney theaters.
There will be Disney theaters. I've long predicted that in 10 years, every big city will have one theater, and it'll be arena sized, and Disney will own it, and it will play Star Wars and Avengers and Pixar movies, and everything else will go straight to streaming.
Yeah, definitely straight to streaming. Because did you see that Disney said they're stopping making 4K Blu-rays of all Disney stuff and Fox titles?
Yeah, I was sad to see that.
And I think they're still making 1080 Blu-rays. I think the issue was that 4K was almost like a beta format. It never took off in the way that they hoped that it was going to. So it doesn't make financial sense. And because it never took off, the materials are still very expensive because they haven't been streamlined like something that Blu-ray has. And even Blu-ray, the materials to get them are not as popular as DVD, which are still very popular.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, I guess I assumed just from the tenor of discussion about this on Twitter that it was a big move to basically end the physical media market.
Oh, it definitely is. It's going to get there at some point. But for now, it's just the 4K stuff is being eliminated from the table. I mean, Disney, I guess you get to own their movies, but they treated their films like crap, like DNRing all their animated films.
Ugh. It's sickening to see. Sickening.
No contextual special features or anything like that, because it's all a happy time in Disney World.
Disney used to be great in the early 2000s. Do you remember those silver-tinned Walt Disney Treasures releases? Those were fantastic.
Hi, I'm Leonard Maltin on every disc.
It was great they had Leonard Maltin because he could provide historical context.
Yep, but now, no historical context, none of that. Just streaming flubber, I guess, on that first page where people will rediscover it just like we did and have happy, fun family times.